All right, as we get into our day 2 notes, then first and foremost, please make sure you've turned in your whole set 2. That way, whoever's in the room, you don't have to worry about making them question if you've done your work or not. Just make sure it's done and turned in, please. Before you get into your next set, a short set of Tracks in the Snow for What's So Funny, Mr. Seiska. I'm going to introduce you to the idea of antecedents, and you're going to do a couple of things, taking notes with me. So when it comes to antecedents, if you've listened to me, I've kind of explained or used this term throughout the year, even without a lesson, knowing that eventually we'd have this lesson. So when it comes to the definition of an antecedent, it is a noun that gives its meaning to a following pronoun. So we have a noun, and then after it is a pronoun that they are connected together. That's what it's telling us. And in the definition of antecedent, we can show what an antecedent is. We have the pronoun its. Well, it goes along with its meaning. Well, who does the meaning or what does the meaning belong to? Excuse me. It belongs to the noun. So the noun is the antecedent. It is a noun that gives its meaning to a following pronoun. Well, what are pronouns? So once again, we want to repeat, just review what our basic pronouns are. There are several other pronouns out there, but nouns are going to be person, place, or thing. They're either going to be specific or they're going to be generic. So they're either proper, which are specific, or they are common, which are your generic ones. The majority of our pronouns that we use are there listed on the right-hand side. So when we're talking about antecedents, then we need to have this identifier. We need to mention who the noun is or what the noun is, and then we can substitute in pronouns, right? So if I would say, well, Miss Edie has asked that you do this, and Miss Edie has asked you to do this, and then Miss Edie wants you to do this, and then Miss Edie wants you to do this, and then Miss Edie also said this. If I just kept saying Miss Edie, Miss Edie, Miss Edie, it gets very redundant and kind of annoying, right? So we can substitute in the pronoun she or her in place of her name, and we know that that's who we're talking about because that's who we mentioned to begin with. That's why it's called an identifier. It's the identity of it. That's what the antecedent is. Now, when we do this, we need to understand we're going to start with some very, very basic sentences and identifying the antecedents, but the antecedent doesn't have to be in the same sentence. It just has to come before the pronoun or pronouns that are being used. And I'll show you that as we finish up the lesson. But follow along with me on the handout. It's a short little, quick little handout. We want to identify the antecedents and the pronouns. So when we look at what the pronouns are and we look at what the nouns are. So once again, I'll put the pronoun examples over here on the right. And nouns are going to be a person, place, thing, or idea. So when I look at Jane called her friend, well, then we have the pronoun her. Well, her friend. Well, whose friend? Right? So in order to say whose friend, then we have to be able to identify the antecedent, and that would be Jane. So the antecedent for her, we know that Jane and her are representing the same person. When it says that John called his friend, that works the exact same way. It's his friend, his and John are connected together, so John is the antecedent for his. Then we get into the girls finished their work. So now we have a plural. So their work, there is the pronoun. Well, whose work is it? Well, it's the girls' work, right? So the girls and their work, they go together. So girls is the antecedent. It's a big fancy word for what should be a pretty easy concept. Then we get into a bigger sentence. The crazy dog went wild for its bone. So you decide, is your answer going to be 1, 2, or 3? What is the antecedent in this question? So first, hopefully you went through and you thought, well, what is the pronoun? Because if I don't know the pronoun, then I can't identify the antecedent. The pronoun is its bone. Whose bone or what's bone? Oh, well, that would be the dog. So hopefully you chose answer 3 because the dog and its bone, right? They go together. They are connected. So dog is the antecedent. Bigger sentence, 2 sentences. That movie was one of the scariest things I have seen. I cannot believe how it made me jump. So we want to look at the pronoun of it. What is it? What belongs to what is the antecedent that it? If I just went up to you and I said, I cannot believe how it made me jump, am I talking about a spider? Am I talking about a pencil that fell on the floor? Or what am I talking about? So when I look at it, we're talking specifically from the first sentence, we hopefully are going to choose the word movie because the movie is what made us jump. So we have the movie in a previous sentence. So as I said, we can have the antecedent in a sentence before or a couple sentences before the pronoun that we are using. How about on C? Why does the class have to continue to review antecedents? We're getting a little bored. I'm sure some of you are thinking that. So we want to find the antecedent. We also want to know what the pronoun is. So what's the pronoun we're talking about in this last sentence? We, right? Well, who is we? Antecedents? Are we the class? Yeah, we are the class. So the class is the antecedent for the idea of we. So how does that apply to our story? So let's look at this story and how we know what an antecedent is and how pronouns are being used. I don't know his name, says the priest, but his face rings a bell. I don't remember the grade I got in 5th grade religion class, but I do remember the laugh I got. It was huge. It was the whole class, except Sister Margaret Mary. It was out of control hysterical. It was glorious. And it set me on my lifelong path of answering that classic question, what's so funny, Mr. Shiska? So let's look at a pronoun that is repeated quite often in this section. We have it and it and it and it again. Well, what is it? What is it we're talking about? What was huge? Or who was huge? Right? What was the whole class? What was out of control? What was glorious? So we want to figure out what the antecedent is that he had mentioned previously before using it. And we have to go all the way back to the idea of the laugh because that's what it is, right? The laugh was huge. The laugh was the whole class. The laugh was out of control, hysterical. The laugh was glorious, and the laugh was what set me on my lifelong path. So the antecedent is laugh, describing what it is that we're talking about. So hopefully this is a pretty easy introduction, and then we'll have some practice throughout this week. But now it's time for you to go to your second set of tracks in the snow.